The Grateful Dead's Dan Healy invented the taper section everyone knows about. What they don't know is that it started because a sixth grader in a town of 220 people strung a wire up a redwood tree. His name was Dan Healy, and yeah, he's the guy who engineered some of the Dead's most legendary shows. Berkeley 84, the Frost Amphitheater runs, Madison Square Garden in the early 80s with that Meyer system that could make an arena sound intimate. But before any of that, before he ever met Jerry Garcia or built a sound system or drew a literal line on the floor at a concert, he was just a kid in Wyatt, California, population 220, trying to broadcast to anyone who would listen. Here's what happened. Young Healy, we're talking grade school, mid-50s, gets obsessed with electronics, radio specifically. So he takes apart an old radio, builds himself a transmitter, and runs a wire up the tallest redwood tree he can find. Just does it. No permission, no license, no plan beyond, let's see if this works. And it worked. Everybody in town could pick up his station. Every family in Wyatt was listening to whatever this kid decided to broadcast. Now, you might think that's just a cute story about a precocious kid. But here's the thing, that exact same instinct, that let's just try it and see what happens approach to technology and sharing, that's the same instinct that 20 years later would create the world's biggest bootleg economy. Because Dan Healy never stopped asking, what if we just let people have this? Fast forward to 1966. Healy's in San Francisco, working at commercial recorders. He's been sleeping in his car earlier, scraping by, learning studio craft and getting good at it. Then one night, John Cipollina from Quicksilver Messenger Service says, hey, you should come see this band at the Fillmore. The band is the Grateful Dead. And Healy walks in and immediately, he knows the sound is terrible. This is from Healy's own account. Pigpen was buried in these tiny bookshelf speakers. Amps were blowing. The mix was a disaster. And Healy, who remember built a broadcast station in a tree when he was 12, looks at this mess and thinks, I can fix that. He says it took him years, but he actually made it. First thing he does, and this is 67, 68, is start stacking Altec MX10 mixers. Just stacking them side by side, mixing from the side of the stage, creating this setup that shouldn't work but does. And here's a detail that Healy himself confirmed. How did he finance building the Dead's first real sound system? He sold weed and LSD. That's not speculation. Healy's on record saying this, which, if you know anything about the Dead in the late 60s, makes perfect sense. But it's still kind of amazing that the foundation of their legendary sound was literally built that way. But that's not even the most important innovation. The most important thing Healy did, probably early 70s, was build a 200-foot snake cable. You know what that is, right? It's what lets you move the mixing board from the side of the stage out into the audience. Before Healy, engineers mixed from the side of the stage or from backstage. They were hearing a completely different sound than the audience. Healy said, that's stupid, and invented the modern front-of-house position. He wanted to hear what the audience heard. He wanted to mix from inside the experience. And then he kept going, working alongside Owsley Bear Stanley and the Alembic team on the Wall of Sound in '74. Quadraphonic surround decoder for the Grateful Dead movie in '75. He designed the delay systems for that. By '83, '84, he's working with John Meyer and Jim Gamble to build what Healy called a Stradivarius PA system. His exact words, John Meyer made him a sound system that could make Madison Square Garden sound like a living room. Listen to soundboards from that era, MSG in October '83. The Meyer system is it's different. 19,000 people in that arena, and the clarity is remarkable. That's Healy. That's what he built. But while Healy's building these incredible sound systems, there's this other thing happening. Tapers. People showing up to Dead shows with cassette decks and microphones, recording everything, and the management hates them. The label hates them. There's this whole narrative that tapers are pirates, that they're stealing from the band. that they're going to kill record sales. Healy doesn't see it that way. According to his own later interviews, he thought tapers were superfans, that they were preserving performances, spreading the music, building the community. But he's also got a practical problem, which is that by the early 80s, tapers were bringing these massive rigs to shows, elaborate microphone arrays on tall poles, and they're setting up right in front of the soundboard, right in front of Healy, blocking his view of the stage. So now he's in this position where he sympathizes with what tapers are doing, but they're also literally preventing him from doing his job. And the pressure from management keeps building. Stop the tapers. Keep the tapers out. Crack down. October 1984, Berkeley Community Theater. 3-night run with October 27th, marking the first official taper section. And the taper situation reaches a breaking point. According to Healy's account, the chaos of people with recording rigs packed in around the soundboard made the situation unsustainable. He couldn't see the stage. He's trying to mix a Grateful Dead show, and he's staring at equipment and bodies. So he does something that seems almost comically simple. He draws a line, literally draws a physical line on the floor, extending from the edges of his mixing board. And he makes it clear, behind me, within the width of my board, is sacred ground. You cannot tape here. Outside that line, tape away. But here's the detail that makes this story perfect, and here's where Healy's whole philosophy shows through. The idea for the taper section came from his daughter. Healy was dealing with this chaos, this conflict between his sympathy for tapers and the practical impossibility of doing his job, and his teenage daughter suggested, "Why don't you just make a taper section?" And he listened. He didn't dismiss it as too simple or too radical. He just did it. Now, Healy being Healy, he doesn't just create a taper section and leave it at that. By the late 80s, he's invented something brilliant, a buffered board feed. Basically, he creates a system where tapers can plug directly into his soundboard without affecting the main mix. You want a copy of what's coming off the board? Here, plug in right here. Take it, it's yours. Think about what that means. The sound engineer for one of the biggest bands in the world is actively helping fans make bootleg recordings. And not just allowing it, engineering solutions to make it easier and higher quality. That's insane. That's revolutionary. That's completely contrary to how every other band in the world operated. And the thing is, Healy was right. In his own words from later interviews, he argued the tapers weren't hurting record sales. They were superfans who bought the records anyway. The tapers built the fan base. They preserved performances alongside engineers like Betty Cantor-Jackson that would have been lost forever. Go on archive.org right now. There are thousands of Grateful Dead shows available, many of them recorded by tapers who stood in sections that Dan Healy created, some of them from the late 80s onward using feeds that Dan Healy provided. That entire ecosystem, that whole archival project exists because a sound engineer who once broadcast from a redwood tree thought, yeah, let people have this. The first official taper section was at Berkeley, that October '84 run. If you find audience recordings from those shows, you can hear the new reality. Tapers positioned behind the board, Healy's mix coming through clear. The chaos settled into something workable. It wasn't perfect immediately, but it was the beginning. And then other bands started copying it. Fish, Widespread Panic, all the jam bands that came after, they all have taper sections now. It's just standard practice. But it started in October '84 at Berkeley Community Theater because Dan Healy's daughter made a suggestion, and Healy had the authority and the will to make it happen. Here's what's kind of heartbreaking, though. Healy left the Grateful Dead in 1994. There were internal tensions, business conflicts, the usual stuff that happens when a band's been together for 30 years. He'd been with them since '66. He'd built their sound from literally nothing, from Pigpen buried in bookshelf speakers to Meyer systems that made arenas sound like living rooms. And then he was gone. Jerry Garcia died the next year, and you have to think about what Garcia thought of the whole taper thing, about Healy's philosophy of just letting people have the music. Garcia advocated for Healy, supported his sound experiments, backed him up. There's a through line there, right? Between Garcia's whole approach to music, it's not about perfection, it's about the moment. It's about sharing the experience. And Healy's instinct to broadcast from a redwood tree to anyone who would listen. The bootleg economy that exists now, that entire culture of trading and archiving and preserving, it didn't happen by accident. It happened because specific people made specific choices. Record labels could have sued. Management could have confiscated equipment. Security could have ejected tapers. And for a lot of bands, that's exactly what happened. But for the Grateful Dead, they had Dan Healy, a guy who understood that controlling the sound didn't mean controlling the recordings. A guy who thought tapers were superfans, not pirates. A guy who, when faced with chaos, didn't crack down. He drew a line and said, "Tape from here." There's an audio from the Frost Amphitheater, April 6, '82. It's an audience recording, and the sound quality is remarkable. You can hear everything. Jerry's guitar, Phil's bass, the vocals cutting through clean. That's partially Healy's mix, but it's also the location the taper chose, the equipment they used, the care they took. And Healy knew those people were out there, every single show, trying to capture what he was creating. And instead of fighting it, he helped them do it better. So yeah, the kid who built a radio station in a redwood tree grew up to build the infrastructure for the world's largest grassroots bootleg network. He didn't do it because he was told to. He did it because someone, his daughter actually, suggested a way to turn chaos into community, to draw a line between the sacred ground behind the soundboard and the space where anyone with a tape deck and microphones could stand and preserve history. That's Dan Healy. That's the actual story. Every time you download a show from archive.org or etree.org or stream on nugs.net, every time you hear a Matrix mix or an audience recording from the 80s or 90s, you're hearing the legacy of a kid who just wanted everyone in town to pick up his station.